Now that we've discussed stakeholder analysis, let's move on to problem analysis. There are several reasons why problem analysis is especially important in the context of development projects. It helps to identify key problems, constraints and opportunities, and the cause and effect relationships. The problem tree is one of the most widely used tools in international development organizations, and it's used to conduct problem analysis. It provides a simple yet robust version of reality, which helps key stakeholders identify not just the core problem, but their effects, as well as underlying issues that contribute to the current state. So beginning with the starter problem that can be either identified via an open brainstorm process with the stakeholders, or it can be, in some cases, pre-identified based upon a preliminary analysis of existing information. Once the starter problem is identified, and preferably all of these steps should be done in a participatory manner through a group process, then the problems which are directly causing the starter problem are put below, and they're called causes, and the problems which are direct effects of the starter problem are put above, and they're called effects. Note that if two or more causes combine to form an effect, you place them on the same level of the diagram. As you can observe on the side, sometimes a cause will have a subcause, creating a chain of causality. The branches of the tree may also show more than a single layer of effects. The guiding question behind the logic of the problem tree is, what causes that? This is a form of logic called cause and effect, and it reads like this: if this happens, then that will happen. The cause and effect arrows are used to connect the levels of the problem tree. The problem tree portrayed in this image identifies the contributors and causes, negative results and effects of deteriorating river water quality in the Delta River project. Problem trees could become very large and complex if you attempt to list all the problems. Remember that we are simply trying to capture a photograph of the current state as a step toward identifying the desired interventions that will bring about an improved future. We will now have a participatory exercise. First, brainstorm the key problems, issues, or challenges related to poor project management which you, or if you're working with a group, a member of your group are experiencing. Once you have the core problem, then ask the question, what caused that core problem? It's likely that the problems will be related to the triple constraint. Remember, time, scope, budget, or quality. Try to identify at least 6 causes before moving on to identifying effects, and then identify at least 6 effects. Remember, this is a time-limited learning exercise, so don't attempt to be comprehensive. Do as much as you can in the time allocated. Once the analysis is complete and the problems have been identified, the next challenge is to identify the objectives that will define the desired future state. This process identifies the means to end relationships. This is the intervention logic that will guide our project. Once a problem tree is complete, the next step is the objectives tree. During this step, we are beginning to identify the future interventions that could fix what is broken in the problem tree. Of course, if we were using an asset-based approach, we would be identifying what future interventions could build upon existing strengths and capacities at this stage. In its simplest form, the objectives tree is a mirror image of the problem tree, where each statement in the problem tree is transformed into a positive objective statement. And as I said earlier, the problem tree displays cause and effect relationships, while the objectives tree shows the means to end relationships. I want to review with you now in order to be sure that you understand what I just explained. When one of the boxes on the slide changes color, think about how the problem can be converted into an objective. The first one, river water is deteriorating. Transforming that, river water quality is approved. The second one, riverine ecosystems under serious threat, including decline of fish stocks. The objective, threat to the riverine ecosystem is reduced and fish stocks are increased. Continuing to go up the effects, number 3, catch and income of fishing families in decline. The objective, catch and income of fishing families is stabilized or increased. Moving to the causes, levels of household and business refuse in the river are high. Number of households and factories discharging wastewater directly into the river is reduced. Population not aware of the dangers of waste dumping. The objective, new legal requirements are established which are effective in preventing direct discharge of wastewater. And finally, public information or education programs unavailable. And the means objective, pollution management, is given a higher political priority. At this point, the development organization should consider 2 critical strategic questions. Which elements of the objective tree will be included in the project intervention? Which elements will not be included in the scope of the project? Reflect on these 2 questions based upon your own experiences in project identification and design. How do you decide which problems to work on? And how do you decide which objectives to prioritize? Is there any information on this slide that you did not cover in that last exercise? Take a quick look to see if this matches what you came up with. In practice, objectives analysis is not as simple as the objectives tree process would suggest, because it's never possible to implement everything that's listed on the objectives tree. It's important that the project team clearly identify and prioritize what will be included in the project and what will be left out. Let's have a look at the Delta River case study to examine possible interventions that arise from objectives tree analysis. Note that the 2 colors represent 2 very different project alternatives or options. It's unlikely that a single international development agency would be interested or have the capacity to implement both types of projects. A project using the objectives in the blue boxes would be focused on changes that would be brought about with government, businesses, and regulatory agencies. The primary benefits of the blue project would go to fishing families. Alternatively, a project focused on the other color would try to make changes at the household level by improving behaviors related to hygiene and waste disposal. The main beneficiaries of this project would be the poor families. Now that the assessment and analysis processes are complete, we're ready to move on to step 3 in the project identification and design phase, and that's identification of the project intervention logic. While there are variations between logical framework models with regard to the terms and their structure, they are all intended to serve the same underlying purposes. Number 1, they are systematic tools for organizing the project thinking and identifying relationships between resources, activities, and project results. Secondly, they are a visual way of presenting and sharing the project intervention logic. And thirdly, the logical framework is a tool for measuring progress through indicators and sources of verification. Logical frameworks have an additional function for project managers. Logframes serve as a tool to identify and assess risk. Risk management, and we'll talk about that in other phases, has its origins in the logframe. The assumptions column serves as the beginning of the risk register. Almost every assumption will be converted into a risk and then actively managed during implementation. The principal tool used to establish the logic of the intervention is called the logical framework matrix, or logframe. It's an analytical tool used to plan, monitor, and evaluate projects. Unfortunately, organizations working in the international development community haven't reached an agreement regarding the terminology used in the logframe. Even though there's general agreement about the logical linkages or the means-end relationships, the words that are used to describe the highest level of change, program goal, impact, overall objective, and strategic objectives differs. Perhaps the most significant differences in terminology arises at the intermediate change level. Some international development organizations even split the intermediate change into 2 separate distinct levels: purpose, outcome, project goal, intermediate result, and component objective. This slide shows a Rosetta Stone of logical frameworks. The original Rosetta Stone is actually a stone that's found in Egypt with writing on it in 2 languages using 3 scripts. A project manager must be able to translate the language of logframes. Please select the correct answer to this question. Despite the variations between the logical framework models, what do they all share in common? A, they use the same number of levels in the matrix. B, they use the same underlying logic. C, they use the same terminology. Or D, all of the above. The correct answer is B. They serve and use the same underlying logic. A is false because some development organizations have 5 or even 6 levels in their hierarchy of objectives. C is false because the terminology is quite variable. They all, however, use the same means to end logic.